Master Chen walked through the bustling marketplace with his head held high. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets as vendors called out their wares. At 62 years old, Chen had spent 4 decades perfecting his karate skills. His weathered hands told stories of countless hours breaking boards. His calloused knuckles bore witness to years of training on wooden posts. The old master wore simple brown robes that hid his muscular frame. People in the village knew him as a humble tea shop owner, but few understood the true extent of his martial arts mastery. Chen had trained under the legendary Master Lu in the mountains, learning ancient techniques passed down through generations. He could break 3 bricks with a single strike, move faster than most men half his age, and had never lost a fight. As Chen approached the palace gates, he noticed something unusual. Royal guards were harassing a young woman selling flowers. The girl couldn't be more than 20, with tears streaming down her face as 2 guards demanded money she clearly didn't have. Her flower basket lay scattered on the ground, colorful petals mixing with dirt. "Please, I already paid the tax this morning," the girl pleaded, her voice shaking with fear. "I have nothing left to give." The taller guard, a man with a scar running down his left cheek, grabbed her arm roughly. "That was yesterday's tax, girl. Today brings new fees. The king needs more gold for his army." Chen's jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold. He had seen this behavior from royal guards before, but today something felt different. The guard seemed more aggressive, more desperate than usual. The shorter guard, a stocky man with mean eyes, raised his hand to strike the flower girl. "Stop," Chen said firmly, stepping forward from the crowd that had gathered to watch. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The scarred guard turned to face Chen, his hand moving instinctively to the sword at his side. "This is none of your business, old man. Move along before you get hurt." Chen looked at the flower girl, who was now cowering behind her overturned basket. "The girl has done nothing wrong. Leave her be," the stocky guard laughed harshly. "Or what? You'll teach us a lesson with your walking stick?" He pointed mockingly at Chen's simple wooden staff. "I won't need it," Chen replied calmly, setting his staff against the nearby wall. The crowd murmured nervously, sensing trouble brewing. The scarred guard drew his sword halfway from its sheath. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. We serve King Marcus directly. 1 word from us and you'll spend the rest of your days in the dungeon." Chen had heard enough. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and delivered a lightning-fast strike to the guard's wrist. The technique was called Thunder Palm in his training, a move designed to temporarily numb an opponent without causing permanent damage. The guard's sword clattered to the ground as he grabbed his wrist in pain. "Impossible," the stocky guard gasped, staring in disbelief. "No one moves that fast." The scarred guard flexed his fingers, trying to restore feeling to his hand. His face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "You'll pay for that, old fool." Nobody strikes a royal guard and walks away. Chen remained in his fighting stance, perfectly balanced on the balls of his feet. "The girl goes free. That's all I want." But the guards weren't finished. The stocky one charged forward with surprising speed, his meaty fist aimed at Chen's head. The old master sidestepped easily, using the guard's momentum against him. With a gentle push, he sent the man tumbling into a pile of grain sacks. The scarred guard had recovered enough to attempt another attack. He came at Chen with a series of wild punches, each one missing as the master flowed like water around his strikes. Chen's movements were economical, precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary motion. "Stand still and fight like a man," the guard shouted in frustration. Chen decided to end the confrontation. He waited for the perfect moment when the guard overextended himself, then struck with devastating precision. His fist connected with a pressure point just below the guard's ribcage, a technique known as dragon's breath that would cause temporary paralysis. The guard dropped to his knees, gasping for air. His companion struggled to stand up from the grain sacks, grain dust covering his uniform. Both men stared at Chen with a mixture of fear and confusion. "How did you do that?" the flower girl whispered, having watched the entire fight in amazement. Chen helped her gather her scattered flowers, his expression kind and grandfatherly once again. "Sometimes we must stand up for what's right even when it seems impossible." The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement about what they had witnessed. Word would spread quickly through the village about the tea shop owner who had defeated 2 royal guards without breaking a sweat. The scarred guard slowly got to his feet, still struggling to breathe normally. "This isn't over, old man. You have no idea what you've started." "I know exactly what I've started," Chen replied quietly. "The question is whether you'll learn from it." As the guards limped away, Chen noticed something that made his blood run cold. The scarred guard bore a tattoo on his neck, a black dragon wrapped around a crown. Chen recognized that symbol from his past, from a time when he was more than just a humble tea shop owner. The flower girl thanked Chen repeatedly, pressing a small white lotus into his hand as a token of gratitude. He accepted it gracefully, but his mind was elsewhere. That tattoo meant these weren't ordinary guards. They belonged to the Shadow Regiment, an elite unit that served the king's darkest purposes. Chen had hoped his fighting days were behind him. He'd spent 20 years living quietly in the village, running his tea shop and teaching occasional meditation classes. But as he walked home that evening, the lotus tucked safely in his robe pocket, he realized that his past was about to catch up with him. The old master prepared his evening tea with steady hands, but his thoughts were troubled. He had recognized something else about the guards during their brief fight: their fighting style. It was crude but effective, designed for intimidation rather than skill. More importantly, they had been testing him, gauging his abilities. Someone wanted to know what Master Chen was capable of. The question was why and what they planned to do with that information. 3 days passed since Chen's encounter with the royal guards. The village seemed quieter than usual, as if everyone was holding their breath waiting for something to happen. Chen continued his daily routine, opening his tea shop at dawn and greeting customers with his usual gentle smile, but he remained alert. His years of training had taught him to sense danger like animals sense storms. On the 4th morning, a stranger entered his shop. The man was tall and lean, dressed in expensive black silk robes that marked him as nobility. His face was angular and pale, with cold gray eyes that seemed to see everything. Most telling of all was the golden medallion hanging from his neck, the mark of a royal advisor. "Master Chen," the stranger said, his voice smooth as silk. "I am Lord Varian, advisor to King Marcus. I believe we need to talk." Chen continued, preparing tea with steady hands, showing no reaction to the impressive title. "I serve all customers equally, Lord Varian. What type of tea would you prefer?" Varian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you know why I'm here. My guards spoke very highly of your skills. They were bothering an innocent girl. I simply helped her." Chen placed a steaming cup before his guest. "Green tea, good for clearing the mind." "Indeed." Varian sipped the tea thoughtfully. "Tell me, how does a simple shopkeeper learn to move like lightning and strike like thunder? These are not skills one picks up from selling tea leaves." Chen's expression remained neutral, but internally he was calculating distances, escape routes, and potential weapons within reach. "I studied martial arts in my youth, like many men. Nothing special." Lord Varian set down his cup and leaned forward. "Nothing special? Master Chen, you disabled 2 trained soldiers without even breathing hard. The scarred guard, Captain Morris, has served the crown for 15 years. He's killed 12 men in combat. Yet you handled him like he was a child playing at war. Perhaps your guards need better training," Chen suggested mildly. Varian laughed, a sound like winter wind through dead leaves. "Oh, they do. That's precisely why I'm here. The kingdom faces threats from all sides: rebels in the north, pirates along the coast, and whispers of invasion from across the sea. The king needs warriors of exceptional skill to train his army." Chen refilled both their cups, buying time to think. "I'm honored by your offer, but I'm too old for such work. My fighting days are behind me." "Are they?" Varian's eyes glittered dangerously. "Because I've been asking questions about you, Master Chen. Very interesting questions with even more interesting answers." The old master felt ice forming in his stomach. "I don't know what you mean. 23 years ago, there was a man who served the previous king. A man known only as the Shadow Fist, who could kill 6 trained assassins without making a sound. This man disappeared the night King Marcus took the throne, vanishing like smoke in the wind." Varian paused for effect. "I wonder what happened to him." Chen's hand tightened slightly on his teacup, the only sign of his growing tension. "That's quite a story, Lord Varian. But I think you have me confused with someone else." "Do I?" Varian reached into his robes and produced a small, yellowed piece of paper. This is a royal decree from the old king. It describes his most trusted bodyguard, a master of ancient fighting arts who could break stone with his bare hands. The description matches you perfectly, down to the small scar above your left eyebrow. Chen involuntarily touched the scar, earned in a battle 25 years ago when he was still young and reckless. Varian noticed the gesture and smiled triumphantly. Chen Wei-Ming, former royal guardian, master of the Seven Thunder techniques, protector of King Roland. Varian spoke each word like a dagger thrust. Did you really think you could hide forever in this backwater village? The silence stretched between them like a taut bowstring. Other customers in the shop continued their conversations, unaware of the deadly game being played at the corner table. King Roland is dead, Chen said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. My oath died with him. But your skills didn't, Varian pressed. The kingdom needs you, Master Chen. King Marcus is willing to overlook your unauthorized departure from royal service if you agree to train his elite guard. Chen stood up slowly, his movements controlled and precise. And if I refuse? Varian's smile turned predatory. Then I'm afraid the king might remember that certain crimes were committed the night of his coronation. Guards were killed, treasure was stolen, and the former royal guardian vanished without explanation, very suspicious circumstances. I took nothing that wasn't rightfully mine, and I killed no one who didn't deserve killing. Chen's voice carried the weight of old pain and carefully buried anger. Perhaps, but that's not how history will remember it if you force my hand. Varian stood as well, his tall frame towering over the older man. I'm offering you a chance to serve your country once again, to use your gifts for the greater good. Don't throw it away out of stubborn pride. Chen looked out the window at the peaceful village street. Children played in the dust while their mothers hung laundry on lines stretched between houses. An old man fed pigeons from a bench near the fountain. These people had become his family over the past 20 years. Protecting them was worth any sacrifice. What exactly would King Marcus expect from me? Chen asked reluctantly. Varian's eyes lit up with victory. Train his shadow regiment, turn them from crude bullies into true warriors. In return, you receive a full pardon and a generous pension. Your past crimes are forgotten. And if I do this, the village is left alone. No more harassment of innocent merchants. You have my word as a royal advisor, Varian said solemnly, though Chen noticed he didn't quite meet his eyes when making the promise. Chen weighed his options carefully. He could refuse and fight, but that would bring the full weight of the royal army down on the village. Innocent people would suffer for his defiance. Or he could agree and hope to find some way to protect both his neighbors and his own conscience. I need time to consider your offer, Chen said finally. Of course, but don't take too long. Varian dropped a silver coin on the table and headed for the door. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. And Master Chen, remember that kings have long memories and longer arms. There's nowhere in this kingdom you could hide if you disappoint us. After Varian left, Chen sat alone in his tea shop, staring into his cup as if it held answers to impossible questions. The white lotus the flower girl had given him lay pressed between the pages of an old book nearby, a reminder of why he had broken his cover in the first place. Outside, normal life continued, but Chen knew that everything had changed. His peaceful exile was over. The only question now was whether he could find a way to serve the crown without betraying his principles, or if he would be forced to choose between his conscience and his neighbor's safety. Chen spent the entire night walking through his village, memorizing every face, every doorway, every stone in the paths he had traveled for 20 years. By dawn, his decision was made. When Lord Varian returned to the tea shop, he found Chen waiting with a small travel bag and his wooden staff. I accept your offer, Chen said quietly, but I have conditions. Varian raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to make demands, Master Chen. Nevertheless, Chen's voice carried the authority of a man who had once guarded kings. The village remains untouched. No more harassment of merchants, no increased taxes, no recruitment of young men for the army. In exchange, I'll train your shadow regiment. Agreed, Varian said quickly, perhaps too quickly for Chen's comfort. The king will be pleased. We leave immediately. The journey to the capital took 3 days through winding mountain roads. Chen rode silently, observing everything while appearing to doze in his saddle. Varian's escort consisted of 12 mounted guards, all bearing the black dragon tattoo he had noticed before. They watched him constantly, hands never straying far from their weapons. On the second night, as they camped beside a mountain stream, Chen overheard 2 guards talking in low voices near the fire. "Never thought we'd actually find the Shadow Fist," one whispered. "My grandfather used to tell stories about him. Said he could kill a man just by touching him in the right spot." "Stories," scoffed his companion. "He's just an old man who got lucky with Morris and Beck. Wait until he faces the regiment. They'll eat him alive." Chen smiled grimly to himself. Let them underestimate him. It would make what was coming easier. They reached the capital at sunset on the 3rd day. The city was larger than Chen remembered, with new walls and towers that spoke of a king who lived in fear of his enemies. Guards patrolled the streets in groups of 4, watching citizens with suspicious eyes. The people hurried about their business with heads down, avoiding eye contact with soldiers. The royal barracks sprawled across several acres near the palace, a maze of training grounds, weapon stores, and living quarters for the king's army. Varian led Chen to a small stone building at the center of the complex. "Your quarters," Varian announced, opening a heavy wooden door. "Simple but comfortable. You'll take your meals with the regiment to build trust and camaraderie." Chen examined the room with professional interest. Stone walls 3 feet thick, 1 small window with iron bars, a heavy door that locked from the outside. This wasn't quarters. It was a prison cell decorated to look hospitable. "When do I meet the men I'm supposed to train?" Chen asked, setting his bag on the narrow bed. "Tomorrow at dawn. The Shadow Regiment consists of 48 men, the finest warriors in the kingdom. They're eager to learn from a legend." Varian's tone suggested otherwise. That night, Chen lay awake listening to the sounds of the barracks. Guards changed shifts every 2 hours, their boots echoing on stone corridors. Someone was always awake, always watching. He had walked willingly into a trap, but perhaps that had been necessary to learn what King Marcus truly planned. Dawn came gray and cold. Guards escorted Chen to a large training ground surrounded by high walls. 48 men waited in neat formation, their faces showing varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and outright hostility. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were larger, stronger, with scars that spoke of serious combat experience. Captain Morris stood at attention in front of the formation, his wrists still bandaged from their encounter in the village. The stocky guard, whose name Chen learned was Sergeant Beck, glowered from the 2nd rank. "Men of the Shadow Regiment," Varian announced from a raised platform. "I present your new trainer, Master Chen. You will show him the respect due to his position and learn everything he has to teach. Your lives may depend on it." As Varian departed, Chen felt the weight of 48 hostile gazes. These men knew he had humiliated 2 of their own. They were here under orders, not by choice. "I know what you're thinking," Chen said, his voice carrying clearly across the training ground. "You're wondering what an old tea seller can teach warriors like you. That's a fair question." He walked slowly in front of the formation, studying each face. "Captain Morris, step forward." Morris hesitated, then approached with obvious reluctance. His hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt. "In our previous encounter, you learned that speed defeats strength," Chen said calmly. "But there's more to fighting than landing the first blow. There's knowing when not to fight at all." Without warning, Chen spun and struck at Morris's chest with his open palm. But instead of the paralyzing technique he had used before, he stopped the strike just inches from contact, holding it there for several heartbeats. "If I had wanted you dead in the village, you would be dead," Chen said matter-of-factly. "I chose not to kill you. That choice was the most important part of our fight, not the techniques I used." He stepped back, addressing the entire formation again. "King Marcus wants you to become better killers. I'm going to teach you to become better warriors. There's a difference, and by the time we're finished, you'll understand what it is." Sergeant Beck stepped forward without permission, his face flushed with anger. "You think you can waltz in here and lecture us about fighting? I've killed more men than you've served cups of tea, old man." "Probably true," Chen agreed mildly.
"How many of them needed to die?"
Beck's expression faltered slightly. "What kind of question is that?" "The most important one a warrior can ask himself." Chen moved to the center of the training ground. "Who among you can break this wooden post with a single strike?" Several men raised their hands. Chen selected a large soldier from the third rank, a man with arms like tree trunks and fists the size of hammers. Demonstrate, Chen instructed. The soldier approached the thick wooden post that stood in the center of the training area. With a mighty roar, he drove his fist into the wood. The post shuddered but held firm, though the soldier's knuckles came away bloody. Good power, poor technique, Chen observed. The wood is harder than your bones. You'll break your hand before you break the post using brute force. Chen walked up to the post, placed his palm against it gently, almost caressingly. The secret isn't using more force. It's understanding the nature of what you're fighting. In one smooth motion, he struck the post with his palm. There was a sharp crack, and the thick wooden beam split cleanly in half, falling to the ground in two pieces. The training ground fell completely silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Wood has grain, Chen explained, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Find the grain, follow it with your strike, and the wood breaks itself. Fight against the grain and you accomplish nothing but pain. He looked around at the stunned faces of the regiment. Men are the same way. Every opponent has weaknesses, patterns, habits that can be used against them. Raw strength and anger make you predictable. Patience and understanding make you unstoppable. Captain Morris stared at the broken post, then at Chen. How did you do that? I'll teach you, Chen promised. All of you. But first, you must understand why you're learning these techniques. They're not party tricks or ways to intimidate enemies. They're tools to end conflicts with the least harm possible. Sergeant Beck shook his head stubbornly. Pretty words, old man. But when someone's trying to kill you, philosophy doesn't matter. Only survival matters, Chen nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Sergeant. When your life is threatened, survival is all that matters. But how many of the men you've killed were actually trying to kill you? And how many were just following orders or protecting their own families or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Chen could see it working its way into the minds of some of the soldiers, forcing them to remember faces and names they'd rather forget. We start with meditation, Chen announced, settling into a cross-legged position on the ground. Before you can master your enemies, you must master yourselves. Meditation? Beck laughed harshly. What are we, monks? Today, yes, Chen replied calmly. Sit, breathe. Think about the last man you killed. Really think about him. What was his name? Did he have children? What was he fighting for? Reluctantly, grumbling among themselves, the Shadow Regiment began to sit down around their new teacher. Chen closed his eyes and began to breathe slowly, deeply, modeling the technique he wanted them to learn. As he sat in silence, surrounded by killers and cutthroats, Chen wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. These men were weapons forged by violence and shaped by cruelty. Could ancient wisdom and patient teaching really change what they had become, or would his lessons only make them more dangerous? Time would tell. For now, he had promised to train them, and Chen Weiming had never broken a promise in his life. 2 weeks into his training of the Shadow Regiment, Chen began to notice changes in the men. Small changes at first. They argued less during meals, showed more respect for their weapons, and some even asked thoughtful questions during evening discussions. But the most significant change was in how they moved. The crude, brutish fighting style he had observed was slowly giving way to something more refined, more controlled. Captain Morris proved to be an unexpected ally. After their initial confrontation, he had become genuinely curious about Chen's methods. During a morning session focusing on pressure points and nerve strikes, Morris approached with a question that surprised everyone. Master Chen, he said respectfully, I've been thinking about what you said about unnecessary killing. In my 15 years of service, I've probably killed 40 men, maybe more. How do I know which ones were necessary? The entire training ground fell silent. This was the same man who had been terrorizing flower girls just weeks ago, now questioning the morality of his past actions. Chen set down the practice dummy he had been using to demonstrate techniques. That's a question only you can answer, Captain. But I can tell you this. The fact that you're asking it means you're becoming a true warrior instead of just a killer. Sergeant Beck, who had remained stubbornly resistant to Chen's teachings, snorted with disgust. Pretty philosophy doesn't change the fact that we're soldiers. Our job is to kill the king's enemies, not debate ethics like old women. Is it? Chen asked mildly. Tell me, Sergeant, what makes someone the king's enemy? Are they born that way? Do they choose it freely? Or are they simply people who disagree with royal policy? Beck's face flushed red. Doesn't matter why they're enemies. Orders are orders. Orders. Chen repeated the word thoughtfully. 23 years ago I received orders too. I was told to guard a doorway while certain events took place in the room beyond. I followed those orders without question like a good soldier. The training ground was absolutely still now. Even Beck was listening intently. Later that night I learned what had happened in that room. The king I had served faithfully for 12 years was dead, poisoned by his own advisors. His wife and young children were murdered in their beds. All because they were obstacles to a new king's ambition. Chen's voice remained steady, but his eyes held depths of old pain. I had helped make those murders possible by following orders without question. By being a good soldier, that's not the same thing, Beck stammered. But his conviction was wavering, isn't it? Chen asked. When you harass merchants for extra taxes, you're following orders. When you intimidate families whose sons have fled conscription, you're being good soldiers. But what are you really accomplishing? Are you protecting the kingdom or just protecting one man's power? A young soldier named Thomas raised his hand tentatively. He was barely 20, with soft features that spoke of a comfortable upbringing before joining the regiment. Master Chen, if we start questioning orders, won't that make us unreliable? The army needs discipline to function. Good question, Thomas. Chen nodded approvingly. True discipline comes from understanding why you're following orders, not from blind obedience. A warrior who questions illegal or immoral commands is more valuable than 1,000 mindless killers. Over the following days, Chen incorporated these philosophical discussions into the physical training. As he taught them advanced techniques, how to strike nerve clusters to disable rather than kill, how to use an opponent's momentum against them, how to end fights quickly with minimal violence, he also taught them to think about when and why to use such skills. The transformation was remarkable. Soldiers who had once swaggered through the capital terrorizing civilians now moved with quiet confidence and restraint. They still possessed all their deadly skills, but they wielded them with wisdom rather than brutality. Captain Morris became Chen's unofficial assistant, helping demonstrate techniques and leading discussions when Chen was called away for meetings with Lord Varian. These meetings were becoming more frequent and more tense. The king is growing impatient, Varian informed Chen during one such session in his opulent office. He expected his shadow regiment to become more efficient killers, not philosophical warriors who question orders. They're becoming better soldiers, Chen replied calmly. Isn't that what you wanted? No, it's not. Varian's mask of civility was beginning to slip. The king needs enforcers who will carry out his will without hesitation. Your students are developing inconvenient consciences. Chen had expected this conversation eventually. A soldier without a conscience is just a murderer in uniform, Lord Varian. If the king wants mindless killers, he should recruit criminals, not train warriors. Perhaps he should. Varian's voice was cold as winter stone. Your usefulness may be reaching its end, Master Chen. The king has been hearing disturbing reports about your training methods. What sort of reports? Chen asked, though he suspected he already knew. Reports that you're filling his elite guards with dangerous ideas about moral responsibility and the limits of royal authority. Some might call that treason. Chen felt the familiar chill of approaching danger. Some might call it creating better protectors for the crown. Loyal soldiers who serve the kingdom's best interests are worth more than brutish thugs who serve only fear. The kingdom's best interests are whatever the king says they are, Varian snapped. That's how monarchy works, Master Chen. Perhaps your years in exile made you forget. I remember perfectly how monarchy works, Chen replied quietly. I also remember what happens when kings forget that their power comes from the people's consent, not from their ability to terrorize those people into submission. The two men stared at each other across the ornate desk, the weight of unspoken threats hanging between them like a sword on a fraying rope. You're walking a dangerous path, Varian warned. The king's patience has limits. So does mine, Chen answered, rising from his chair. Good day, Lord Varian. As Chen walked back to the training grounds, his mind was racing. The situation was deteriorating faster than he had hoped. Soon he would be forced to choose between abandoning his students to return to their brutal ways, or openly defying the king's wishes. Neither option was acceptable. That evening, as the regiment gathered for their usual discussion period, Chen decided to prepare them for what might be coming. He had taught them to question orders and think for themselves. Now he needed to see if those lessons had truly taken root. "I want to discuss loyalty," he began, settling into his familiar cross-legged position. "What does it mean to be loyal to your king?" The men exchanged glances. They could sense something important in Chen's tone. Captain Morris spoke first. "Loyalty means following orders and serving faithfully. But what if the orders contradict each other?" Chen asked. "What if your oath to protect the kingdom conflicts with orders to harm innocent people?" Thomas raised his hand again. "Master Chen, are you saying we might have to choose between serving the king and serving the kingdom?" "I'm saying that choice has always existed," Chen replied. "Most of the time they're the same thing. But when they're not, a true warrior must decide which loyalty is more important. Loyalty to one man, or loyalty to the principles that make a kingdom worth defending." Sergeant Beck, who had been unusually quiet lately, suddenly stood up. "This is treason talk, plain and simple. I won't listen to any more of it." He stalked toward the exit but stopped when Chen called his name. "Sergeant Beck, may I ask you something?" Beck turned back reluctantly. "What? Do you have children?" The question seemed to catch Beck off guard. "2 sons, why? What kind of kingdom do you want them to inherit? One ruled by fear and brutality, or one governed by justice and honor?" Beck's jaw worked silently for several moments. Finally, he returned to his seat without another word. Chen looked around at the faces of his students, men who had been killers and bullies just weeks ago, now grappling with questions of conscience and duty that most people never had to consider. "Tomorrow may bring difficult choices," he told them quietly. "I can't tell you what those choices should be, but I can tell you this. Whatever you decide, make sure you can live with the consequences. Make sure your children can live with them too." As the men dispersed to their quarters, Chen remained sitting in the empty training ground, staring up at the stars. Somewhere in the palace, King Marcus and Lord Varian were probably planning his next move. Soon the game of cat and mouse would end, and the real test of his teachings would begin. He thought of his peaceful tea shop, of the flower girl whose simple act of gratitude had started this entire chain of events. Had he made the right choice in coming here? Or had his desire to protect one village doomed an entire kingdom to continued tyranny? Time would tell. But Chen Wei-ming was done running from his past. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage he had tried to instill in 48 troubled souls who were learning, perhaps for the first time in their lives, what it truly meant to be warriors. The summons came at dawn, delivered by a nervous young page who could barely meet Chen's eyes. King Marcus wanted to see his shadow regiment demonstrate their new skills in the throne room immediately. Chen knew this wasn't a request, it was a test and possibly a trap. As the regiment formed up in the courtyard, Chen noticed the tension in their faces. Word had spread through the barracks about dissatisfaction in high places. The men knew something significant was about to happen. "Stay calm," Chen advised them quietly. "Remember what you've learned, but more importantly, remember why you've learned it. Whatever happens today, let your conscience guide your actions." Captain Morris moved closer to Chen as they marched toward the palace. "Master, I need to tell you something. Lord Varian has been asking questions about our training sessions, specifically about the discussions we've been having." Chen nodded grimly. "I expected as much." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing useful," Morris replied. "But some of the other men, Beck has been reporting to him regularly." Chen glanced back at Sergeant Beck, who was marching with the rear guard, his face carefully neutral. "I know, I've known for weeks, and you knew?" Morris looked shocked. "Then why didn't you stop the discussions? Why risk everything?" "Because some truths are worth the risk," Chen answered quietly. Besides, Beck needed to hear those discussions as much as anyone. Maybe more. The throne room of King Marcus was designed to intimidate. Massive stone columns reached toward a vaulted ceiling, decorated with scenes of royal victories. Tapestries depicting conquered enemies hung from the walls, and the throne itself was carved from black marble, making the king appear to sit in judgment from the mouth of a dark cave. King Marcus was younger than Chen had expected, perhaps 40 years old with sharp features and calculating eyes that missed nothing. He wore simple but expensive robes, letting his position speak for itself rather than relying on gaudy displays of wealth. Lord Varian stood beside the throne, his face showing smug satisfaction as the Shadow Regiment filed into formation before their ruler. "So," King Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "these are my elite guards, transformed by the legendary Shadow Fist into perfect warriors. Show me what you've learned. Chen stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, the men have made remarkable progress in— I didn't ask for a report, the king interrupted coldly. I want a demonstration. Captain Morris, select 2 men to spar with practice weapons. Morris hesitated for a moment, then chose 2 soldiers from the middle ranks. They moved to the center of the room and began a careful, controlled match that showcased the precision and restraint Chen had taught them. Their movements were fluid, economical, designed to disable rather than destroy. King Marcus watched for several minutes, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. Finally, he held up a hand to stop the demonstration. This is what you call improvement? He demanded. They fight like dancers, not soldiers. Where is the killer instinct? Where is the ruthless efficiency my enemies should fear? Your Majesty, Chen said carefully. These men can now end fights quickly and efficiently while minimizing unnecessary— Unnecessary? The king's voice rose dangerously. The only thing unnecessary is mercy toward my enemies. Lord Varian tells me you've been filling my soldiers' heads with philosophy and moral doubts. Is this true? The throne room fell silent except for the echo of the king's words from the stone walls. Chen felt 48 pairs of eyes watching him, waiting to see how he would respond. I have taught them to think before they act, Your Majesty, to consider the consequences of violence and use it only when truly necessary. King Marcus stood up from his throne, his face flushed with anger. I don't pay soldiers to think. I pay them to obey, to strike fear into anyone who dares oppose my rule. A kingdom built on fear alone will not stand, Your Majesty, Chen said quietly. History has proven this time and again. History? The king laughed harshly. You want to discuss history? Let's talk about the night my predecessor died. Lord Varian has told me very interesting stories about that night, Master Chen. Stories about a certain royal guardian who failed in his duty. Chen's blood turned to ice. This was the moment he had been dreading since arriving at the capital. I protected King Roland with my life for 12 years, Chen said steadily. His death was not due to any failure on my part. No. King Marcus descended the steps of his throne slowly, like a predator stalking prey. Then perhaps you can explain why you vanished that very night, taking with you certain items that belonged to the crown? I took nothing that wasn't freely given to me by my dying king, Chen replied, though he could feel the trap closing around him. Lord Varian produced a scroll from his robes and unrolled it dramatically. This is a royal warrant signed by King Roland just hours before his death. It names you Chen Wei-Ming as guardian of the crown prince until his 18th birthday. Tell me, Master Chen, where is Prince David now? The question hit Chen like a physical blow. He had hoped his secret would remain buried forever, but clearly Varian had been more thorough in his investigations than expected. Prince David died with his father, Chen said carefully. The entire royal family was murdered that night. Was he? King Marcus smiled coldly. Or did a certain disgraced guardian spirit him away to safety, along with a considerable portion of the royal treasury? Chen could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Around him, the Shadow Regiment was beginning to understand the true stakes of this confrontation. Even if such a thing had happened, Chen said slowly, it would have been the act of a loyal guardian following his king's final wishes. It would have been treason and theft, King Marcus corrected. Punishable by death, unless of course the guilty party proved his loyalty to the rightful king by revealing the location of the stolen prince and treasure. Now the trap was fully revealed. Chen had walked into the capital thinking he was protecting his village and training better soldiers. In reality, he had been lured here so the king could extract information about Prince David's whereabouts. Captain Morris stepped forward unexpectedly. Your Majesty, with respect, Master Chen has served faithfully these past weeks. Whatever happened 20 years ago— Silence! King Marcus roared. I didn't ask for your opinion, Captain. In fact, Lord Varian tells me you've become quite vocal about questioning royal orders. Perhaps you need a reminder of what happens to disloyal soldiers. The king gestured, and 20 additional guards emerged from alcoves around the throne room, surrounding the Shadow Regiment with drawn swords. Now then, Master Chen, King Marcus continued, his voice returning to its cold, controlled tone, you have a choice. Reveal the location of David Roland and the stolen treasury, and your students live. Continue this pretense of ignorance, and I'll execute them one by one until you cooperate. Chen looked at the faces of his students, men who had transformed from brutal enforcers into thoughtful warriors under his guidance. They deserved better than to die for his past mistakes, but Prince David deserved better too. The rightful heir to the throne, now a grown man of 28, living peacefully as a blacksmith in a distant province, had no idea that his father's killer was demanding his location. "I need time to consider your offer." "Your Majesty," Chen said finally. King Marcus smiled triumphantly. "You have until tomorrow at dawn. Lord Varian will escort you to quarters where you can think without distraction. Guards, take the Shadow Regiment to the dungeons until their teacher makes his decision." As the guards moved to surround his students, Chen made eye contact with Captain Morris and gave the slightest of nods. Morris understood immediately and began subtly positioning his men for what was coming. Chen had spent weeks teaching them to think for themselves and question unjust orders. Now he was about to discover if those lessons had truly taken hold, because the time for philosophical discussions was over. The real test was about to begin. The explosion of violence came faster than lightning. At Chen's barely perceptible signal, the Shadow Regiment moved as one unit. Their weeks of training under his guidance finally put to the ultimate test. Captain Morris struck the guard nearest to him with a precise nerve strike that dropped the man instantly. Thomas, the young soldier who had asked so many thoughtful questions, disarmed two opponents with the fluid grace Chen had taught them all. But it was Sergeant Beck who surprised everyone the most. Instead of helping the king's guards as everyone expected, he stepped between Chen and Lord Varian's sword thrust, taking the blade meant for his teacher across his shoulder. "Beck!" Chen shouted, catching the wounded sergeant as he fell. "Had to choose sides eventually," Beck gasped through gritted teeth. "Figured I'd choose the one that lets me sleep at night." The throne room erupted into chaos. 20 guards against 48 members of the Shadow Regiment should have been an easy victory for the king's forces. But Chen's students fought with precision, restraint, and deadly efficiency. They disabled rather than killed when possible, but showed no mercy to those who threatened innocent lives. King Marcus had retreated behind his throne, screaming orders that no one could hear over the clash of steel on steel. Lord Varian fought with surprising skill, his swordwork elegant and deadly. But even he couldn't match the coordinated assault of warriors who had learned to trust each other completely. Chen found himself facing 3 guards simultaneously, their swords flashing in the torchlight as they tried to corner him against a massive pillar. The old master moved like water, flowing around their attacks, using their aggression against them. A precise strike to one guard's wrist sent his sword clattering across the marble floor. A gentle push sent another stumbling into his companion, tangling them both long enough for Chen to disable them with pressure point strikes. "Master Chen," Captain Morris called out urgently. "The king!" Chen spun to see King Marcus holding a crossbow, its bolt aimed directly at Thomas, who was helping wounded comrades near the chamber's entrance. The young soldier would die before he could even see the threat coming. Without hesitation, Chen launched himself across the throne room in a flying leap that carried him directly into the path of the crossbow bolt. He felt the steel point punch through his side just below his ribs, but his momentum carried him into King Marcus, sending them both crashing to the floor behind the throne. "You fool," the king snarled, struggling beneath Chen's weight. "Do you think this changes anything? Even if you kill me, my armies will hunt down every member of your precious regiment. They'll burn your village to ash looking for the prince." Chen pressed a hand to his wounded side, feeling warm blood seeping between his fingers. "The prince is beyond your reach, your majesty. He has been for 20 years. Tell me where he is." King Marcus demanded, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "I already have," Chen said quietly. "Prince David is beyond your reach because he doesn't know who he truly is. He lives as a common blacksmith, believing his parents died of plague when he was 8 years old. He has a wife, 2 children, and a peaceful life. He poses no threat to you or your crown." King Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "You mean he doesn't even know he's the rightful heir?" "He knows he's a good man who makes horseshoes and helps his neighbors," Chen replied. "That's all he needs to know. The kingdom already has a king, and the people seem content enough with your rule. Why create conflict where none exists?" The fighting in the throne room was winding down. Chen's students had systematically disabled most of the king's guards, though several members of the regiment had been wounded in the process. Lord Varian lay unconscious near the steps of the throne, his elegant sword broken in 2 pieces. Captain Morris approached cautiously, his own sword still drawn. "Master, what do we do now?" Chen struggled to his feet, the crossbow bolt still protruding from his side. Now you make your own choices, Captain. I've taught you everything I can. We can't just let the king live, Morris said quietly. He'll never stop hunting us. And he'll take his revenge on innocent people. Chen looked at King Marcus, who was backing away with fear plain on his face. The ruler who had seemed so imposing on his throne now looked like what he truly was. A frightened man who had gained power through violence and held it through terror. What would killing him accomplish? Chen asked. Would it make the kingdom more just? Would it protect the people better? Or would it just create a power vacuum that some other ambitious lord would fill? Morris struggled with the question, his sword wavering in his grip. I don't know. I don't know what the right choice is. Then you're learning wisdom, Chen said with a slight smile. The right choice isn't always clear. Sometimes you have to choose between bad options and try to minimize harm. Thomas limped forward, a cut across his forehead bleeding freely. Master Chen, what about Prince David? If the king knows he exists? The king knows a blacksmith named David exists somewhere in the kingdom. So do 10,000 other people with that name. Chen's voice was growing weaker as blood loss took its toll. Without more specific information, which I'll never provide, he's just one man among millions. Sergeant Beck, his shoulder roughly bandaged with torn cloth, spoke up unexpectedly. What if we offered the king a different deal? Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. Here's what I'm thinking, Beck continued, wincing as he adjusted his wounded arm. The king keeps his crown, but he agrees to rule more justly. Less oppression, less arbitrary violence, and we, the Shadow Regiment, become his advisors instead of his enforcers. We help him be a better king instead of just a more feared one. King Marcus laughed bitterly. You think I'll negotiate with traitors who attacked me in my own throne room? I think you'll negotiate with 48 skilled warriors who could have killed you but chose not to, Beck replied calmly. That's gotta count for something. Chen felt a surge of pride as he watched his students grapple with this complex situation. They weren't looking for the easiest solution or the most violent one. They were trying to find the choice that would create the most good and cause the least harm. There's wisdom in Sergeant Beck's proposal, Chen said finally. Your Majesty, you have a choice. Continue ruling through fear, and spend the rest of your reign watching for assassins and rebellion, or accept the counsel of men who understand both loyalty and justice, and build a kingdom that will last. King Marcus looked around the throne room at the faces of the Shadow Regiment. These were men who had served him faithfully until today, men who could have easily killed him but had chosen restraint instead. And if I refuse this generous offer? He asked. Captain Morris answered quietly. Then we walk away, all of us. The Shadow Regiment dissolves, and you can explain to your nobles why your elite guards abandoned their posts. But we won't serve a king who rules through terror and threatens innocent people. The silence stretched for long moments, broken only by the distant sounds of normal palace life continuing outside the throne room. Unaware of the drama that had unfolded here, King Marcus straightened his robes and walked back to his throne. Very well. I accept your proposal. The Shadow Regiment will serve as royal advisors, helping to maintain order through justice rather than fear. But I want it understood that I am still king, and my word is still law. Of course, Your Majesty, Chen said, swaying slightly as his wound continued to bleed. No one is questioning your authority. We're simply offering to help you use it more wisely. As royal physicians hurried into the throne room to tend the wounded, Chen felt a strange sense of completion. He had come to the capital to protect his village from royal harassment. Instead, he had helped transform a group of brutal enforcers into thoughtful guardians and negotiated a new relationship between ruler and subjects that might benefit the entire kingdom. The crossbow bolt in his side would heal, though it would leave another scar to add to his collection. Prince David would remain safely anonymous in his distant village, making horseshoes and raising his children in peace. And the Shadow Regiment would continue to serve their king, but now with the wisdom to question orders that conflicted with justice and the courage to speak truth to power. Chen looked around the throne room at his students. No longer students, really, but grown men who had learned to think for themselves and choose their own paths. Captain Morris was organizing medical care for both sides wounded. Thomas was already deep in discussion with other regiment members about how their new advisory role might work. Even Sergeant Beck, despite his injury, was talking quietly with some of the king's guards about integrating their forces more effectively. As Chen was helped from the throne room by palace physicians, he thought of his tea shop back in the village, of the flower girl whose simple gratitude had started this entire adventure. Perhaps it was time to return to his peaceful life of brewing tea and teaching meditation. But somehow he suspected his teaching days were far from over. The Shadow Regiment would need guidance as they navigated their new roles, and King Marcus would need patient instruction in the difference between ruling and leading. There was still much work to be done. For now, though, Chen Wei-ming was content to rest and let his wounds heal, knowing that he had planted seeds of wisdom in fertile,